Listen to Salam Media.
The time's just gone 11 minutes past 8 a.m. this morning on News and Views. And in the last week, we have been talking about the strike at Clover. We know there was protest action in the Western Cape at one of the Pick and Pay stores. And also with regards to Clover and its workers, now there have been huge question marks raised against the company that has taken over the South African dairy company, Clover. And this has prompted the SABDS Coalition to come out in support and issue statements, and also to understand as to why the SABDS Coalition is supporting this move, where it's talking about supporting striking Clover workers, but also at the same time calling for apartheid Israel to be expelled from South Africa. We joined on the line this morning by SABDS Coalition coordinator, Roshan Dadoo. Roshan, welcome to the show. Wonderful that you are able to join us once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes, now I've seen the statement with regards to the SABDS coalition supporting the striking Clover workers, and I think sometimes people, try to get to grips as to why this is necessary, but also looking at the background to the takeover of Clover, and we know central to this is the Israeli Central Bottling Company, the CBC. They've taken over the dairy company through its subsidiary, Milko SA. And I think it's important for us to actually understand the background to this Israeli Coca-Cola bottling company, where it is, where it's located in apartheid Israel, and how this entire transaction has unfolded with the takeover of Milko in South Africa.
Yes, thank you. I mean, firstly, from the start of the proposal by Milko South Africa, which is a subsidiary set up from the Central Bottling Company in Israel to take over Clover, the solidarity movements were involved with the trade unions in putting together a submission to the Competition Commission and then the Competition Commission Tribunal, pointing out that if South Africa is firstly serious about boycott, divestment and sanctions, we shouldn't be looking at the Israeli subsidiary taking a majority share in one of the oldest and biggest dairy companies in South Africa, Clover. And it's clear, as we warned then, that this acquisition has brought apartheid back to South African shores. When we look at the conditions, the wage cuts, the closures of factories that Clover workers are on strike about now, this is precisely bringing back the kind of labour conditions we saw under apartheid. The company has not negotiated with the unions over this. The workers were just receiving notices saying that they now must work a longer working week, that wages are going to be cut by 20% in effect because of longer hours, working over holidays, and the working conditions of those workers that have not been retrenched, of which there are already 1,800 retrenched workers from last year, and there are plans by the company to retrench 800 more by February, and clearly more because they've already closed 2 factories in the Western Cape and 4 more around the country, including City Deep in Johannesburg, are earmarked to close. So this is clearly an Israeli apartheid company reintroducing, in effect, apartheid labor conditions in South Africa. Further, they want to restructure the company in such a way, and the closure of factories has had an impact, a knock-on effect, of course, on dairy farmers. And the company's plans to only keep factories by coastal areas. We were warned by the Palestinian unions that, in fact, Central Bottling Company in Israel mostly is a distributor and exporter of products. So we are concerned that this looks like it's going to destroy our capacity, our food security around dairy products, make us dependent on imports and potentially Israeli imports. So the whole situation, I think, brings to the fore the fact that Israeli companies should not be welcome into South Africa. they bring not the promised increase in jobs and investment and development, but exactly the opposite. And I think it's important to say that the Palestinian trade unions have been sending messages of solidarity to the Clover workers here. And solidarity is not just a one-way business. Whilst we obviously are standing in solidarity with Palestinians, particularly workers in the Central Bottling Company, its major factory is in the West Bank, in this industrial development settlement of Atarot, which is now surrounded by the apartheid wall. So you can imagine the companies are incentivized, Israeli companies are incentivized to set up business in there. But you can imagine how awful it is for the Palestinians who then are forced to work in these companies through more and more of their land, and disincentivization for Palestinian businesses and dairy farms to work in these companies, where now they have to cross through checkpoints every day just to get to work, is one example of how degrading and how humiliating the labor practices are in these kinds of companies in occupied Palestinian territory. They also have, in fact, in occupied Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, another company there. So I think the connections are clear, and the workers and the trade unions here are clear. So we're really calling on Palestine solidarity activists, people who have always supported the Palestinian people, to see Clover as being reintroduction of apartheid through apartheid Israel in South Africa, and is in standing in solidarity with the Palestinians as they are sending messages. Just yesterday, there was an online rally organized by the trade unions here involved with Clover. More trade unions that are joining, by the way. And there was a speaker from the Palestinian Farmers Union. So they are sending us solidarity at the same time as we're witnessing those appalling scenes in East Jerusalem and standing in solidarity with them. So I think it's really important for people here to see those connections, and as Palestinians certainly do. And it's very much central to the issues involved in the strike here.
Yes, and also, Roshan, I think what is important to understand is the statement talks about Milko systematically undermining the South African dairy sector. And it's not only about undermining, it's actually destroying, considering what you've mentioned in terms of, a number of them have basically closed as well, and with regards to job losses. But also, when one looks at Palestine, and we know that the Israeli dairy sector has destroyed the Palestinian dairy sector. We know about dairy farms that have been bombed. We know about cows that have been shot. Now, all of this at the end of the day is destroying the Palestinian dairy factories to such an extent that even they are being barred, they are being stopped from selling their products to fellow Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Now, all of this put together tells us, as to the urgency of the matter for our government to basically act. Because at the end of the day, when one looks at South Africa, the warning signs are there. It is ominous when we're looking at the future of this particular industry under the control of a company that supports Zionist Israel.
Absolutely. And in fact, it was the Palestinian unions that were telling us what happened to the Palestinian dairy farmers. They were saying that they've sort of been systematically destroying the Palestinian dairy sector through, first of all, obviously taking the land, but then they've been bombing cows even in fields, shooting at cows in fields, and dairy farms are systematically being demolished. So, as you're saying, the Palestinian dairy farmers are barred from selling products to fellow Palestinians in Jerusalem, then making people dependent in that way on buying Israeli products. And that market of Palestinian sales to East Jerusalem makes up 40% of the Palestinian dairy sector. So you can see exactly the same thing is happening here, because dairy farms are reporting here that where the Clover factories have already closed, they are now unable to sell their products, and they are also having to cut back and also close. So it's clear that the same modus operandi of an apartheid Israeli company is coming here. And if we undermine our dairy sector, it's just going to be a disaster, not only for dairy farmers, for workers on farms, for workers in companies like Clover. It's going to mean all of us are dependent on importing products. And we certainly don't want to see a situation where we're importing all of our Ultramel and all of our milk and all of the soft drinks that are also bottled by a central bottling company from apartheid Israel, from that very industrial settlement in the West Bank, Atarot, where their main company is. So I think we're calling on the government, as we did at the time of the Competition Commission Tribunal, by the way, to say, no, we reject this kind of investment. It's not investment. It's actually degrowing our economy here. And we're calling, as the unions are calling, for a different model. They're discussing with the IDC at the moment the possibility of a buyout of the share of Milko and the establishment of Clover as a cooperative under workers' control, which is a very viable alternative. We have policy on cooperatives. There are all sorts of models that work as cooperatives around the world. And in fact, Clover, at its very beginning, was a cooperative. It was a cooperative, obviously, of racist colonialists who at that time were the beneficiaries of the initial stealing of our land. But the farmers created Clover as a cooperative. So I think, we're saying, yes, let's look at a different model, which will be better for food security for South Africa, for workers' jobs in the industry, and will reject Israeli exploitative and rapacious investments, so-called, into Africa, and in this case, South Africa, where their promises of development are shown to be total myths, total lies, that once they get here, all they want is to exploit us further in every possible way. And this is the pattern that's going on throughout Africa, by the way. And comrades within the Solidarity Movement in the Pan-African Palestine Solidarity Network have been sending messages of support, because they also can see what happens when Israel land grabs in countries and fools people by saying it's development. In the end, it ends up with people in this continent being in a much worse situation.
Yes, and we know, Roshan, for a long time, not only South Africa, but the African continent itself, where Israel has got a huge interest. They have targeted the African continent for various reasons, apart from just the security deals, and we're talking about cyber weapons, cyber spying, and all of that is taking place on the African continent. And this is what the statement talks about. On top of that, the profits Israeli companies make by exploiting workers and farmers right across Africa. So if they succeed in South Africa, the African continent is under threat.
Absolutely. And, have been translating statements on Clover into Kiswahili and French and Portuguese in different countries, into Arabic in North Africa, because it's really an issue for the whole continent. And that's why we're going to be, again, intensifying pressure on the government here, but particularly in other countries on the continent, to kick Israel out of the AU, because if they get a foothold within the AU, if they're allowed to be an observer on the business of our continent, this is the kind of calamity that we're going to see all over the continent. They come here with the promises of development and these new technologies. Even in South Africa, we've been looking at the agricultural and water sector, and there's a number of Israeli companies and development assistance projects here that we're going to be campaigning against, because they just come here with lies. It's not the technology even that they say they're so wonderful. They can produce water out of clouds and so on. The water people here in the water sector have been saying, a lot of this is actually nonsense. One of the projects here, they're saying, is basically an air conditioner on the back of a bakkie, totally unsustainable. You need more energy to drive the air conditioner, as it were, than it takes to produce water. It's not a sustainable way of making sure we have access to water throughout the country, throughout all communities. And so we really need to expose this myth that Israel in any way is beneficial to South Africa or to the rest of our continent, and kick them out of the AU.
Also, Roshan, just talking about exposing this entity, and we've seen recently there was this protest that had taken place at one of the Pick and Pay stores. I think it was in Observatory out in the Cape, and it was not against Pick and Pay, but just to highlight what Clover is doing, to the workers, and also at the same time the trade unions coming out very, very strongly. Now, this is a campaign that shouldn't lose momentum. It needs to be ongoing, Roshan.
Absolutely, and I think we've seen, as you say, where shops people have gone into shops, stuck stickers, and this is just exactly what people used to do internationally against South African apartheid. Go into shops, stick stickers so we won't buy apartheid products. Talking to the managers, saying you shouldn't be stocking these products, and a number of shops in the Western Cape have come out and said we are not going to any longer stock Clover products. So the boycott of Clover is very important, and I hope your listeners will have seen from last year and the year before even the start of the boycott Clover. And there's going to be a day of action, a national day of action, in fact an international day of action on the 27th of January. So we're going to look at shops to target, look at in making a really big campaign that day around boycotting Clover products. And the unions also are going to be taking part in that around the country. There's also on Saturday a rally in the Joburg in the Cathedral Hall at the end of Smith Street, corner of Nugget. A big rally, as you said. Other trade unions are now getting involved. SAFTU, the Trade Union Federation, Kawusa, Thorn, and a number of other unions are also taking action, in fact, in cheese factories in Luxembourg. One of them is saying they refuse to fulfill the Clover orders because they can see the connections and they can see that this is going to have a knock-on effect on their jobs and their working conditions. And so in all of this, we're seeing the hand of apartheid Israel. And we're really urging people to take action, to boycott Clover, to spread the word, to not stock Clover products. And we hope that we will really intensify the actions and live up to the solidarity that we're receiving from Palestine over this issue.
Well, Roshan, we do appreciate you taking time out and talking to us this morning here on News and Views on Salam Media. We wish you all the best. And once again, as always, we thank you for your time. Please be safe.
Thank you. And boycott Clover.
Roshan Dadoo, coordinator with the SA BDS Coalition, calling on the boycott of Clover, but also at the same time coming out in support of the striking Clover workers, calling for apartheid Israel to be expelled out of South Africa. The time is headed for just 8:30 a.m. We still will be talking about Israeli forces demolishing Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah. Sorry about that. We've got Zakaria Ode, coordinator at the Civic Coalition for Human Rights in Jerusalem, will be joining us immediately after this.